How
This
to,
conference will now be recorded.
um, I think everyone on our webinar this afternoon should be lenders. And my name is Sally Carruthers. I am CEO, President of To Read An Appraisal Services. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Everybody on the webinar is in mute mode. So you actually won't be able to share at all during the webinar. This really keeps us able to move along fairly quickly. And what I suggest at the end, I will have my email address. And if you have any questions, please let me know, any comments too. Also, I try to keep this webinar to about 45 minutes. Sometimes it might go a little bit longer. So with that, this is a huge topic. Appraisers actually take probably a 2-day class on reading an appraisal or on this subject. So we're going to move through it pretty quickly, and we're really doing an overview, just kind of trying kind of explain a few things and some tricks to the trade, and maybe help you if you have borrowers that want to appeal an appraisal or something like that. Also, we are recording this, so if you have colleagues that want to attend the webinar, they can do so. If they're not able to with us now, just let me know, or we will actually put it up on our website. So also may be useful to some of your borrowers too. So please feel free to share it with them. So let's move right through this and see what we have here. So first of all, I just want to explain in simplest terms what an appraisal is. It is actually an opinion of value, and it is as of an effective date, a very specific date. Usually when we're doing a single family appraisal and reporting it on a 1004 URAR form, that's what we're going to concentrate on today. It is done, the effective date is the actual inspection date. There are other dates that may be used. Sometimes there are hypothetical dates in the future. Sometimes there are retrospective appraisals, but for our purposes, we're going to say that's the inspection date. Real property can be residential or commercial. We're not going to touch on that today. And it could be with an improved with buildings, a building or buildings, or it could be just vacant land. So all kinds of residential property. Could also be multifamily, condominium, co-ops, and on the commercial side, many other things. So what is the definition of market value? This is very, very important to understand this. It is essentially the most probable price that a property will bring in a competitive and open market. And that's with everyone being typically motivated, their parties being well informed. There's a reasonable time for exposure, and the payment is in cash or something equivalent, which would be a mortgage or something like that. Essentially, it is the normal consideration of property would be unaffected by special or creative financing. So why is this important? Well, particularly at this time, we find that sometimes the price or the contract price is not always the market value. Price does not always equal value, and cost in new construction doesn't always match value. And that's because there are different circumstances. So right now, for example, we have markets that have a very limited supply of properties, a lot of pent-up demand for properties. We have situations where there are multiple offers, and with that also lower interest rates. And sometimes the properties are bid up maybe to a price that is above market value. In other circumstances too, you may have situations which are not where the price is not market value. You may have related parties who sell a property at a discount. You may have an estate. You may have a foreclosure. There are lots of situations where the price paid is not always the market value. You may just have a situation where you have an out-of-town buyer come into an area. They're not knowledgeable of that area, and they may kind of pay above market, not understanding what is going on. So that's why this definition is pretty important. It is inside every appraisal report, is required to be there. And where that definition comes from is also very important. But this is kind of most general one that we're using on residential properties. So who is the appraiser? So we're going to send out an appraiser to appraise the property. Who is that person? It is essentially a person that provides impartial and unbiased opinions on the value of real estate. In all states, that appraiser is required to be licensed or certified. It is the actual states that license, certify, and oversee appraisers, but they do it under a federal mandate. The states are overseen by the federal government, actually, to make sure that they're doing it according to FIRE. Qualifications for appraisers are pretty difficult. I guess you probably all know at this point we also have an appraiser capacity problem. We don't have enough appraisers. There are many appraisers who have left their profession, particularly during the pandemic. The population of appraisers is aging. None of us are getting any younger. And there are very few people coming into the profession. And part of that really is the barrier, which is this extensive qualification for licensing and certification. For certification, there is a requirement for a four-year degree. Not for licensing, but some college education is required. On top of that, there is extensive appraisal education classes required. There is an experience requirement, and then an examination, a national examination at the end of it. So I'm told that it takes longer to be an appraiser than it does to be an airline pilot. I'm not quite sure if that's true, but certainly, and the pandemic also has highlighted this even more because appraisers or potential appraisers were not able to do appraisal classes in a classroom setting, and many states did not approve online classes. So we do have a real shortage of appraisers right now, and everybody knows that. They know that in the profession, and there are things being done to hopefully kind of make that better and bring more people into the profession. So how does an appraiser actually perform a residential appraisal? Well, a lot of people think that an appraiser pops out to the property and spends about 20 minutes walking around and taking photographs and goes back and, issues an appraisal report. It's not quite that simple. There's a lot of things that go into an appraisal. So yes, they have to go out there and inspect the property. They look at each room. They measure the exterior. Actually, I kind of, someone said to me the other day, they saw some old appraiser with a wheel measuring a property, and I'm like, well, most of them do it with lasers now. It is a little more sophisticated than it used to be. But they evaluate the condition and quality, and they inspect all the entire property. So they have to look at the entire site. So if there is just a quarter-acre site, they're going to walk that site. If there is a 5-acre site, they should be inspecting the entire property. And the reason for that is that there could be issues with the site. There may be potential environmental issues. Someone put some old tires in the corner of a lot somewhere, or there's old farm equipment that's leaking oil somewhere. So it's very important that they look at the entire site. They take a lot of photographs, inside and outside. Every room is photographed, and every side of the exterior of the property is photographed. Every outbuilding should be photographed, and the street. They observe any deferred maintenance, any potential safety and healthy safety and health issues with the property. So, but perhaps there's something wrong with the roof, or there is some cracking in the basement or something like that. So how long does that actual inspection take? Probably, depending on the size, somewhere up to an hour, but maybe longer if on a larger property. So that's only one part. So we kind of got an hour into it, maybe an hour and a half already, but there's a lot of other things they do. So they research and analyze actual subject property. And that includes any recent sales or listings on the subject property, the taxes, parcel number, any special assessments, zoning, homeowners association, anything like that. So they actually do research on the subject property and the subject in anything to do that. Also the contract and listings of the subject property. They will research and analyze current market conditions, both micro and macro economics, economic factors. So supply, demand, price increases, decreases, employment, financial influences such as, interest rates, availability of finance, and any other neighborhood influences there may be. And that could be anything. Maybe they're building a new school in the area or something like that will impact the market conditions for the area. They will research and analyze site conditions. So that is the size of the site. It is the shape of the site, zoning issues, utilities, easements, encroachments, potential flood issues, environmental issues, anything like that. They will obviously research and analyze and select and inspect potential comparable sales and listings. And then they will research also any comparable vacant site sales. They will research and analyze any current construction costs of the property to prepare the cost approach. And finally, they're going to prepare and issue a final appraisal report. So all of that probably takes from start to finish about 5 to 6 hours. So that's kind of what is involved in actually performing a residential appraisal. So appraisers and the appraisal industry works under a lot of rules and regulations. There are each of the appraisal industry is actually regulated by the State Appraisal Board, who oversee appraisal licensing and enforcement. And the main thing, oh, my security thing popped up there. The main kind of ethical performance standards, excuse me one moment, are the uniform standards of professional appraisal practice. So what is important in that is the ethics rule of USPAP. And that basically states that an appraiser must perform an appraisal with impartiality, objectivity, and independence. That is extremely important. And it's really what puts appraisers up there as a profession in the valuation field. So we do have other professions that carry out valuations. We have realtors who perform broker's price opinions or CMAs, but they are not working under that idea or that actual rule of USPAP that says that an appraisal must be impartial, objective, and independent. There should be no subjectivity in an appraisal, ever. An appraiser is unbiased, and they are not allowed under USPAP to advocate for anyone in the appraisal except for their own appraisal. So also, if they are doing appraisals for mortgage purposes, they're likely to work under Fannie Mae, perhaps, or Freddie Mac, FHA, or VA guidelines. So there are a lot of things that go into a lot of sets of standards and regulations and guidelines that appraisers will work under. So a few things here that just to clarify some some things for people to understand in the workings of an appraisal. And we want to talk about a little bit about client and intended user. So an appraisal that is performed for a lender is there for the purpose, the intended use of that appraisal is to ascertain the collateral value for a mortgage. So when an appraisal is performed for mortgage purposes, the intended use is for mortgage purposes, the lender is the client. The lender is the person who can fulfill the intended use of the appraisal. They're the ones who need to know what the collateral value is. And there may be, in some circumstances, other intended users. For example, if an appraisal is done for FHA, HUD is the intended user. The borrower is neither the client or the intended user. They are simply a third party. The borrower cannot issue a mortgage. They cannot fulfill the intended use of the appraisal. So under regulation, this is where this comes into importance. Under regulation, they do get a copy of the appraisal. However, because of the confidentiality standards within USPAP, the appraiser is not allowed to discuss assignment results with the borrower unless permitted by the client, which is you guys, the lender. So it's very important. We often get circumstances where borrowers try to call the appraiser. They know who the appraiser is. They might have met them during the inspection. And the appraiser, I can't talk to you, and they get upset. Well, the appraiser can't unless you expressly say, yes, you can talk to them. So they may not be able to, and the same with a realtor or something like that. I know many realtors who just try and call an appraiser to discuss the value or discuss some part of the appraisal, and the appraiser says, no, I can't talk about that. I'm I have to adhere to USPAP. So that's something kind of important to know. So what are the contents of a residential appraisal report? So basically kind of a list here of what it is. Normally an appraisal report, I think, the average probably about 40, 45 pages. Some are a little shorter, some are a little longer, some are really longer. But there is basically, in an appraisal report, there is actually a form, which is on a single family residential report is a URAR 1004 form. And that form is, I think, probably about 4 or 5 pages, including the certifications on it. So that will include the subject information, contract information and analysis, neighborhood analysis, site information, improvement information. It will include on the second page the sales comparison approach, the cost approach. There is a space there for the income approach. It's not normally completed on a single family property. There is a reconciliation, a value as of with an effective date. There are some limiting conditions and certifications. There will be a signature of the appraiser with the appraiser's information, their license number, and that kind of thing. And then some addenda that usually includes a sketch, several pages of photographs, a location map, and then some other addenda. There may be a plat map in there, flood map, and some other things that may be in there. So these appraisal reports have got pretty long. When I first started appraising many years ago, I think they were probably about 2 or 3 pages long. So now they've got fairly detailed and fairly lengthy. So most residential appraisals, as I said, are done on the 1004 form, and they are also done under what's called the Fannie Mae Freddie Mac Uniform Appraisal Data Set. So there is a set of coding in the appraisal report. What this does, the report is actually uploaded in an XML format that allows it to be delivered to Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or FHA in this format with a certain amount of coding. And it allows these parties to be able to scrub the report and issue what's called an SSR or a risk score on the appraisal. So each one of so all the information on the subject property and the comparables includes some of this so what coding. So there's coding on the condition between C1 and C6. So C1 is brand new, C6 is pretty crappy condition. Quality Q1 to Q6, and that the condition rating kind of shows whether the property is being updated or not updated versus remodeled. And then the various other abbreviations so that discuss the location and site and other things. They're included in the appraisal is a list of all this coding that specifically actually defines what it is. So I would recommend that when you hand the appraisal over to your borrower, you kind of point them to that data set definition so they do understand that C1 means brand new condition. Well, hopefully they don't have a C6 condition, but that's pretty crappy. And then what N stands for neutral, A stands for adverse, et cetera, on it. And it's very self-explanatory. So I would make sure that you have them look at that. So the other thing is that in the appraisal report, we have kind of some little, because of this UAD formatting, some kind of a little bit of weird ways of putting different counts and different areas. And one of those is bathroom counts. In residential appraisal world, a 3/4 bath is a full bath. So if you've got a shower, you're okay, it's a full bath. You don't have to actually have a bathtub in there for it to be a full bath. Similarly, a 1/4 bath, which is just a toilet without a sink, is not counted in a bathroom count. So the way that bathrooms are described in the 1004 form is by full baths and half baths, the number of full baths and the number of half baths. So if you have 3 full baths and 2 half baths, it would be described as 3.2. If it was 2 full baths and 1 half bath, it would be 2.1. So it's kind of a little bit different from how it used to be done. So kind of important that people understand how that goes about. So one of the big misconceptions I get about or hear from borrowers and sometimes lenders is about the lower level or above grade and below grade living area. When calculating the GLA, gross living area of a building, an appraiser measures the outside dimensions per floor to calculate the above grade area. On a condo, of course, you can't often do that, so you might have to do the inside. And so the gross living area includes any area that is above grade, but it does not include basements. That's below grade. It does not include garages or outbuildings or anything like that. So it's any above grade area. So when we get to this basement area, the below grade area, anything down below there, is not included in the gross living area. It doesn't matter about the quality of finish, doesn't matter about the window area or anything else. Anytime you go downstairs, it is not above grade. So even if you have a walkout basement, it's not counted as a above grade living area. It is entirely possible, highly unusual, but there may be properties that actually don't have any gross living area. We have what I always used to call them hobbit houses, but berm houses that really, they're all below grade. That's highly unusual. And the reason that we do it like this is basically you kind of have to set the standard somewhere. And so there has to be a set standard on what it is. So even where you have walkout basements, or you have raised ranches, or split level homes, anytime part of that area is below grade, is counted in the lower level. Now, what is important here, and I think this is kind of a big misconception, is just because it is counted in that lower area does not mean that it doesn't have value. It can have as much value as the above grade, dependent on finish, or and people obviously have a living area in large walkout basements. Maybe 3/4 of the area is outside, and that area can have a lot of value, an awful lot of value. So it's not that it doesn't have value. And when you look at an appraisal report, the basement area, the type of basement or the type of lower grade, lower level is broken out, the amount of finish and the amount of rooms, allowing appraisers to be able to give value, obviously, to that area if necessary. So let's actually look at the appraisal report and kind of run through some things. This is the first page of the form. You'll see here we have the subject area. So the subject area is going to include the address, and the address on a residential appraisal report is it's written in a specific way. It has to be compliant to the United States Postal Service. So it's actually a Postal Service address, and that allows it to be geocoded. So we actually have a specific way of doing that. So, and then we have the borrower's name on there, a legal description, and then the assessor's number, that parcel number, maybe multiple parcels in an appraisal. The taxes, and usually the tax year is the previous year because taxes are in arrear. And then we can have some other information in this: who lives in the property, is it owner occupied, is it tenant vacant, the property rights appraised, and then importantly the assignment type. Is it, and it's always for mortgage purposes when we do the appraisal for you guys, for the lender, so is it a purchase transaction, is it a refinance transaction, or maybe something else? It may be new construction, maybe home equity, or whatever. And the name of the lender there. So we also, in that subject section, the appraiser is required to say if the property is actually for sale, currently listed, or has been within the last year. That is actually a use fact requirement too. An appraiser is required to look at any current listings on the property, and then where those come from. And then we have the contract section. In this particular report, it's a refinance. So the contract section should never be filled out on a refinance. There is no contract. But the contract section is pretty important. The appraiser, as I said, again, this is a use fact requirement, is required to not just inspect the contract, but actually analyze it, make sure that if it's an arm's length or non-arm's length transaction, and if there are any concessions there or anything else. Then moving down, we have the neighborhood characteristics. So in this one, I think this is a fairly recent appraisal. So you can see it's a suburban neighborhood, as we would expect. Probably in the suburban neighborhood, it's about 25 to 75% built up, and the growth rate's fairly stable. But important to see what we have right now, and this is very common in many suburban areas throughout the country. And this one, I think, is just outside of Chattanooga. But we have increasing property values. And then if you look at the demand and supply section, you see supplies, and there's a shortage, which is typical. And with that, you would expect short marketing time. So the marketing time is under 30 months. So, the limited supply, the short marketing times would tend to show that there would be increasing property values. So nicely filled out kind of neighborhood section, kind of telling quite a lot in just kind of 3 boxes of where that market is right now. The appraiser is required to put the 1-unit housing price, the kind of range in that neighborhood, also the age, and how the land mix is made up. So as we see, we got a 25 to 75% buildup, predominantly single unit, a little bit of 2 to 4 family in there, some multifamily, not much, and very limited commercial, and still a little bit of vacant land in there. So the appraiser is also required to put specific neighborhood boundaries. A neighborhood has to have a very, very specific boundary. We have to kind of describe what that is. So they are required to put a north, south, east, and west boundary into there, and then describe the neighborhood and also any current market conditions. And actually, I think they have kind of described this very well down in the market conditions. It's currently experiencing an undersupply of active properties countywide, short marketing times and values increasing. So we're kind of seeing it, and then they've kind of said, 5 to 10% in the last 12 months. So for properties in this price range. So kind of nice description, succinct on what we've got in this particular neighborhood, have done very well. So the next section is the site section. This is incredibly important too. There's some very important information in here, especially kind of from an appraisal standpoint that kind of impact value. You'll see in there we got the dimensions of the site, the shape, and then the view. You see that there? That's the NRES. That's actually one of those UAD kind of abbreviations. Neutral residential, that stands for. So you have adverse, neutral, beneficial. So beneficial being the best. So then we have the zoning in there, and which is forest, agricultural, residential. It is legal. That's very important because that kind of sets the next bit of the appraisal, which is the highest and best use. Under USPAP, an appraiser is required to appraise the property to its highest and best use for market value. Highest and best use is really what the use that the property would sell for. And there are tests for that, but the first one is it legally permitted? Yes, the zoning's there, so it kind of complies with that. We're going to have really major issues if the highest and best use wasn't as it is, as in residential. On the zoning, there are other kind of alternatives. There are many areas that you guys cover, rural areas where there is no zoning. Those of you from Texas, we kind of have large swaths of area in Texas that aren't zoned. And then also there are sometimes legal non-conforming. A property may be grandfathered in from an original zoning. So you can sometimes come see that, and as long as the property can be rebuilt to its existing use, I think you guys are usually okay to provide a mortgage on it. We also talk about utilities. This particular property has public water, but it has a septic sewer. There is a comment in here about that it's typical, and there is no public sewer available. There is information on the flood hazard area. It is not in a flood zone, and the flood map is being provided. If it was in the flood zone, you probably would include, the appraiser probably would include a flood map in the appraisal. And there are no adverse site conditions, which is really important. It means that there are no adverse easements, encroachments, other things that could be a problem. Shared driveways, that kind of thing, environmental issues, as I said. So that's the site section. So we're still on page 1 of the report, actually. The next one is all the improvements. So this is the actual house and garage and maybe outbuildings. So it looks like we have a 1.25 modern ranch built in 2006. It has an effective age that is less than the actual age of the property, kind of indicating it has been well maintained. Its effective age, it's kind of like a lot of us that may be a certain age, but we kind of looked after ourselves and may have an effective age a little less. So this one has an effective age of 7, so that is good. And that matches when we go down and look at our C3. That's a pretty good above average condition for the property. So all that kind of matches up. So we have a property that has been well maintained. The property has a crawl space, no basement or lower level, has a scuttle attic. Looks like the heat and air conditioning are electric. There is a description of the exterior, interior as well. Any kind of porches, patios, pools, any garages and driveways. And if you look, there is that room count there, 632. So it has 6 rooms altogether. We don't typically include a utility room in that room. So I think in this one, there was a living room, kitchen, I think a sitting room, 3 bedrooms and 2 baths. And the actual above grade square foot is 1,751. And then it looks like, as I said, C3 condition. The kitchen's been updated less than a year ago. Bathrooms are original, but it looks like it's had some nice updates to it. And usually the appraisal will state whether the utilities are on and working. So the next 2 questions, which is right at the bottom of page 1, are pretty important and often kind of overlooked. But the appraiser is required to put any physical deficiencies or adverse conditions that affect the livability, soundness, or structural integrity of the property. On this one, there aren't any. But if the appraiser gone in and maybe there was a problem with the roof or maybe some cracks in the basement or something like that, they might have marked yes there. And you would expect if that box is marked yes, you would expect the appraisal to be made subject to. So either subject to an inspection of that area by an expert or subject to remedy of that property. And then the other thing is, does the property generally conform to the neighborhood? Appraisers like conformity. We like things to match up. If in areas of 3 and 4 bedroom homes, we're concerned if we have a 1 or 2 bedroom home. And the market likes conformity. We don't like oddities. So it's what we call functional utility. Does the property function well? Is it something that meets market demand? And is the style, condition, construction similar to whatever else is in the neighborhood? So maybe we could have a property that is so much better than everything else in the area, and that's called an over improvement or super adequacy for the area. Or maybe we just got the smallest house in the neighborhood, or maybe something else that makes it odd. And you guys don't really like properties that don't conform in the same way that appraisers don't. So you really want that yes to be marked down there. So we're on the second page now. I'm not going through every page of the report, so don't worry about it. I'm just going through the main crux of it. But this is the sales comparison grid, and this is probably the meat of the appraisal. So under the sales comparison analysis, the appraiser is required to provide comparable sales and at least 3 comparable sales, sometimes more, but never less. And they must have sold. They should be recent sales. They should be proximate sales. In other words, they should be close to the subject property. In a kind of market like the one in this report that we've got in this webinar, with short marketing times and increasing values, I would want to see very recent sales. And we do have here very recent sales. And so there are no time adjustments. I would rather see recent sales than maybe more proximate sales. And in fact, these sales we got one right. very, very close, and then 1, 2 miles, 1 mile away, which is uncommon in a suburban neighborhood. And they look very similar to the subject property. So they are supposed to be similar. So how, when you're looking at this grid and you're seeing all these things on the left-hand side that the appraiser is making comparisons to, and how do you know those sales are good sales, they're reasonable sales? Well, I'll give you some tools that I would say. First of all, are they recent? Yes, these ones are recent. Are they proximate? Yes, they're proximate. The next thing are, is the square foot similar? Yes, square foot is similar. Kind of would like to see the square foot bracketed. It is in this case, it's not necessary. The same with the site area, and these are bracketed. I think we have good comps. The other thing we like to look at is at the bottom, we look at the percentage of adjustments. And if you look, the percentage is fairly low on these adjustments, which means that they're pretty similar. The appraiser hasn't had to make a whole lot of adjustments. The biggest adjustments that you're going to see in this particular appraisal are for the basement. So 2 of the comparable sales the appraiser used actually have basements, and she's actually had to adjust for that. In all probability, sale number 1 is such a good sale because it's very close and very, very recent, probably kind of means that's such a good sale. So maybe sale number 2 is not quite as good. But sale number 3 seems to be a very good sale too, because that also doesn't have a basement. So that percentage adjustment down the bottom is really important. The difference between net and gross adjustment. Net adjustment is the actual amount that's adjusted. So on sale number 1, you've gone minus 14, plus 3, minus 4. So actually, you've only made 12,600, the net adjustment's 12,600. But the actual adjustment is the gross adjustment. So you've gone up 1,400, then add on 3,000, 14,600. So that's the actual gross adjustment. So you really would like to see those net adjustments kind of under 15% is where we like to see it, and then the gross adjustments under 25%. If possible, there is no kind of rule around that anymore. There used to be. So we also want to make sure that these days on market are pretty consistent too. Appraisers use that for something called the exposure time. The other thing I would like to see is that the non-adjusted, the unadjusted, and the adjusted sale prices. So the unadjusted is that sale price you see at the top there. So that's the 280,000, the 301,000. Are fairly close together. There's not a huge range. And also, we don't want to see a huge range on the unadjusted. The reason on the unadjusted is that really the perfect sales, the perfect comparables are good purchase alternatives to the subject property. In other words, if a person hadn't bought the subject property, would they have bought sale number 1 or sale number 2 and sale number 3? And I think in this case, on this appraisal, you'd say, yeah, I can see if I'm going out to look for properties and, I want some kind of ranch, I want about 1,700 square foot, I want 3 bedrooms, I think you would buy one of those other sales. And then why we want that adjusted range, at the bottom to be fairly close, is it really kind of shows the appraisers making the right kind of adjustments, that those adjustments reflect real differences with the differences to the subject property. So the appraiser will make an adjustment for a difference between the comparable sale and the subject property. So if the comparable sale is better, they will adjust and make a subtraction. The amount of that is determined by the market, how much the market's willing to pay for that difference. It's calculated either through paired sales or regression analysis. We're not going to go into a whole bunch of details on that. Usually appraisers have some kind of software that will do regression analysis or help them with calculating some of those adjustments. On sale number 2 here, we have a minus 3,000 adjustment on the site. So that comparable has a little bigger site and it's better, so there's a negative adjustment. So comparable better, subtract CBS. If the comparable is inferior on a specific item to the subject property, there will be a positive adjustment. So if you look at comp number 2 again, it's a little smaller, it has 1,500 square foot, and there is a positive $8,800 adjustment. So comparable, inferior, add, CIA. Always kind of little tidbits for learning how that is. But this appraisal kind of pretty much adds up. So that's kind of the sales comparison approach. Then we go down a little further on that second page, and the appraiser is required to provide details of any sale on the subject property in the last 3 years, and it looks like the property did sell back in 2019. Looks like there has been some increases since there. The value by the sales comparison is $285,500. The cost approach was also done, and the final value is $85,500 as of 11/9/2021, which is the effective age of the property and also the inspection date. The little box, as is completed. This is an as is appraisal. Going back up, there was a prior sale on the subject property, but none on the comparables. The appraiser, how does the appraiser come over the $285,500? They reconcile. They are required to reconcile by USPAP. They will usually look at the sales and what sales are closer. They will look at the amount of adjustments and will usually do what's called a weighted analysis of a weighted comparison to arrive at that final value. Appraisers never ever average, so they don't just take all those things and average them. They have to do what's called a weighted average. You'll see there are certain, I told you if there were adverse conditions there, the property may have been made subject to foreign repairs or subject to inspection. If this was new construction and the property hadn't been built yet, the appraiser would have appraised it according to the plans, as if the property stood right now according to those plans and specifications. So also there is a cost approach on the next page, and also with that an income approach that isn't usually used, and some information on the project right there. Cost approach is based on a site value that is usually arrived at using vacant sales, and then calculated using cost data that comes from usually a cost handbook, which is available online to appraisers they subscribe to. Or maybe, if they have information on construction costs from some other source that they can actually reference. In the cost approach, the property is actually depreciated, and that is done by a method called age life, which takes the effective age and divides it by the total economic life. There'll be a test on this later on, so don't worry. But that is the cost approach. Not always required, but sometimes quite useful. So moving through, I'm just going to talk about a few of the things you might see in an addendum. There is a certification and everything on there. It's pretty self-explanatory. But then we kind of have some other things in there. There is always a sketch, and the sketch should have some calculations on how that gross living area was that came up with. You can see that there's a main level, there's a bonus level, and the garage, the stoop, the screen porch deck are not included in that in the gross living area. And that should be labeled too. lots of photographs of the property. So, you know, I know people who kind of look at the photographs first, but the photographs should tell a lot about what the property is like. So yeah, we do have a fairly kind of typical ranch here with, you know, 2-car garage, brick, vinyl. And all the interior photographs should be there and labeled. And then pictures of the comparable sales. And once you look at those comparable sales, look pretty similar to the subject property. So I think that this appraiser did a pretty good job. There is a location map that will show all the comps and how close they are to the subject property. The appraisers have, in their software, have geocoding built into the software that calculates the distance of the comparable sales, so there's no making that up. When the appraisal gets sent through the UCDP portal, the Fannie Mae portal, it will also verify that that distance is correct too. So no making that one up. So I went a little bit over my 45 minutes. I apologize. As I said, this is an overview. I would welcome anyone who wants a more detailed explanation with a really kind of careful run through the entire appraisal report to contact me, and I would love to do that for any of our lenders, and we could make that you know, kind of questions and answers, and rather than just kind of a one-way webinar like this is. So if you do, please let me know. As I said, this is being recorded, so if you want to use this, you can, and I do welcome any questions. I'm sorry that we kind of run through it so quickly. I hope everybody understood it, and I thank all of you for being here this afternoon, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you very much.